Great. I should have walked up slower. Well, it's good to be back with you guys. If you have been here when I've been here in the past, you've probably noticed a couple of things, three things probably. One, I'm a little bit heavier than I was the last time I was here. Fortunately, my number two, my hair's a little bit longer than it was last time. And it's kind of like a social experiment for me. I'm just trying to see how long I can go. I can't hardly stand it, but I decided to try and see how long, and so it's just kind of like, I'm not going to let my hair win. I'm just going to keep going with it. Not till it hits the ground, but, well, it's going to hit the ground eventually, but it might be because I chop it off. But anyhow, and then number three, you might be wondering, like, why am I wearing a coat? Because I haven't done that before. And that's a great question, and I'm not really sure that I have an answer. But other than this, there's that's actually two reasons, and one we'll get to in a second. But a friend of mine, Dan is here, Dan the Doyles, and this coat, we actually have the same coat because we were on like a traveling singing team a long time ago. And so I just kind of wanted to see if he recognized it and see if he still had it. And he still has his too. But there's a couple of caveats, at least for me, like don't ask me to button it. Like hopefully this is fashionable enough. If I button it, the buttons are going to pop off and it's just not going to be pretty. And one of you might lose an eye and that would be bad, right? No, so this coat is actually old. I've had this coat longer than I've known my wife, which is kind of weird to say. But anyhow, I'm not sure how I got stuck on that. Other than to say, make sure you're here for Sunday school at 11 because Dan's going to be sharing on some things on evangelism and stuff. And so it's good to see them and see them around again. And so all that being said, I should probably give a little bit of an update on my family because I know that y'all have been praying for, at least for Eden, these last few years. And so she has, and I've shared this before, but she was diagnosed with gastroparesis and dysautonomia a couple years ago. And thankfully, we did a second gastric emptying test like a month or two ago. And so she doesn't have the gastroparesis anymore. So we're thankful for that. So thank you for your prayers. Just continue to pray as we kind of navigate the dysautonomia stuff. They kind of go hand in hand. So we're excited. She was excited. Like I would have been excited because I can eat because the gastroparesis is low fat, low fiber. So I would have been excited that I can eat like ice cream and all the high fat content stuff, which is why I'm heavier than I was last time I was here. But she was excited because she could eat like fruits and vegetables again, and I thought, wow, that's true because she couldn't. So we're excited about that. I was also like, I hate fruits and vegetables, but now I can take my portion and I can give them to her. So I'm excited about that too. Anyhow, so thank you for praying. We have May is a busy month for us. Ali's graduating. Novi graduates as well. And so that week, Thursday, we have the graduation stuff at our church. And then Friday is my son's kindergarten graduation. And then Saturday is Novi's like open house reception stuff. So it's like I'm not blessed to have kindergarten, high school, and college at the same time, thankfully. But I do have it, so it's just weird. It's really weird. But anyhow, all that to say, I'm excited to be here this morning with you. If you were here in the past, we walked through some things in Joshua, but that was several years ago. So we're going to go back there this morning to Joshua chapter 9. Joshua chapter 9. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn there. I entitled the message this morning, A Forgotten Prayer and a Forgiven People. Forgotten Prayer and Forgiven People. And hopefully as we walk through this, you'll kind of see why I went with this title. And as I was preparing for the message and kind of reviewing everything, I was thinking about how important it is to learn from past mistakes, right? Albert Einstein, I think he coined the phrase. I looked it up on the internet, so I'm very confident that this is true. It's said that he coined the phrase, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. We've probably all heard that phrase. I didn't know that Albert Einstein coined that. The internet did, though, so that's good. And I think whether you say that's insanity or not, as you look through scriptures, and at least in the Old Testament, and you can kind of see that it's a common problem, right? Abraham tried to hide the fact that Sarah was his wife twice, and then a little bit later, his son Isaac did the same thing. Isaac and Rebekah struggled to show favoritism to their sons. They showed favoritism, and that was a huge problem. And then Jacob, their son, did the same thing. Right? And so it's a pattern that was repeated often. And honestly, it's something that I struggle with all the time. Right? Whether it's a sin that I struggle with and keep committing, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to change anything, but I'm not going to commit this sin anymore. And maybe you're in my boat. Maybe you understand. At least for me, that doesn't ever work. But every time I think it will, I just fail to learn from the past. Or something as simple as saying, this month we're going to stay within our grocery budget, but I haven't adjusted it since, last month, because, everything's always going up, right? So we're going to stay within our budget, but we're still going to buy eggs, right? And that just doesn't work. We try to do the same thing, but we don't change anything, and we end up with the same result. And that's something I think we're going to see today a little bit. The other thing that I was thinking about was just how important it is to learn from history, right? George Santa Anna stated in 1905, he said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. In 1948, Winston Churchill said to the British House of Commons, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Right? Similar things. Today we're going to see how both of these issues would cause problems for Israel. Right? Trying to do the same thing or not learning from history's issues in the past. As Joshua continues to move into the promised land. And so we're in Joshua chapter 9, just to kind of brief catch up chapters. Chapter 1, we know Joshua got the message from the Lord, be strong and courageous. He echoes that to his people. They kind of echo it back to him, and then they get ready. In chapter 2, he sends spies out, and they go into Jericho. Rahab helps them out. Rahab's delivered from Jericho. The walls fall. It's a great battle, great victory that God does. They just march around a few times, and then they move on to Ai, right? And in Ai, they're all excited and they're all amped up, and they forget and instead of praying and asking God, how should we go in and fight this battle? They just kind of look at it and they're like, and Joseph tries the same things he did before. He's like, okay, it's not a big city. We don't need to send hardly anybody in. They send a few hundred and they get decimated. And then Joshua comes to God and it's like, the world's ended. And God tells Joshua, get up, quit whining, basically. You've sinned, your people have sinned, and because you've sinned, you didn't do what I told you to do, you're not going to get my blessings. And so they deal with that, and then what they should have done is prayed at the beginning and dealt with the sin and then gone into Ai, right? But they got the pattern all messed up. And so that's they go in, they defeat Ai the second time, then they find themselves between these two mountains. It's kind of like this amphitheater thing, and they gather half of the people on one side, half of the people on the other. This is chapter 7 and 8. And they read through, again, the law and through Deuteronomy and all of the promises and all the blessings and the cursings focusing on the blessings and the cursings, they would kind of like echo it. The blessings from one mountain and the cursings from the other. It was this big echo that everybody would be able to hear. It was kind of like a big worship service. They're consecrating themselves again to go in. And that's where we find ourselves in Joshua chapter 9. All right. Let me try to tie in the scripture reading this morning. I didn't want to read through the whole chapter in the scripture reading, so I told Pastor Brian about this passage. One of the things that I love in this passage is there's two things that I heard in the 1 Timothy passage. One was the importance of prayer, and two, the importance of how God desires people to come to know him and to follow him. Right? And I think we think of those two things, and we think of today's title, A Forgotten Prayer and a Forgiven People. And hopefully, when we walk out later today, after the Sunday school class by Dan, we will walk out with an understanding of the importance of prayer, like 1 Timothy talked about, and the importance of giving people opportunities to come to Christ and to share the gospel and to see them make those decisions to follow Jesus. So, all of that said, let's jump into Joshua chapter 9. I'm just going to read bits and pieces here, but we'll read the first two verses as we start in. And the first thing I want us to look at, if you're taking notes this morning, is the difference that sin can make. All right, you say, let's look at chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. Here's what it says. It says, as soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan, in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. Now, so what's the difference that sin makes? Well, let's compare this response to what they said in Jericho in Joshua chapter 5. You can see it on the screen there. So listen for the differences. This is what the people of Jericho said. The people of after Jericho, after the walls fell. This is what these same people were saying. As soon as the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west and the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they crossed over, their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. So from chapter 5 to chapter 9, they went from their hearts melted and there was no hope and there's no way that we can fight these people, to chapter 9, it says they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. What changed? Well, I think they saw a power that had faded. They saw a power that had faded because of unconfessed sin. It shouldn't be unconfessed. Because of past sin, basically, right? They just saw Israel go into Ai, and they just saw them be defeated. Now later Ai was destroyed and decimated, but that doesn't change the fact that these kings went from we can't defeat them at all to, hey, we just saw this one small little town hold them off for a little bit and defeat them a little bit. So maybe there's hope. And if there's just a little bit of hope, maybe we can gather together and fight, right? And so they saw that Israel could be defeated, so they were no longer deathly afraid. And I think thinking through this, I think this is why Satan tries so hard to put our spiritual leaders into a place where they can easily fall, because one sin can destroy a whole ministry. Right? And you don't have to look too hard or think too hard to see that happen over and over and over again, and it just gets frustrating, right? These sins of whether it's a leader or a church itself or a group of Christ followers, whatever you want to say, but our sin has impacts beyond the things that we usually think, right? In this case, the sin of one man, Achan at Jericho, impacted the deaths of hundreds at Ai, and now while the sin has been dealt with, there's still repercussions in the sense that these people are now going to fight against them. One sin can destroy everything. So, question this morning is, what is it that you are struggling to confess and move beyond today? Right? Your sin today will impact tomorrow in ways you have not even thought about. Take the time today to get rid of that sin and confess it to God so that you can move forward before anything happens. So they saw a power that had faded because of past sin, but also because of forgotten prayer. Right? If only Joshua had taken time to pray prior to chapter 7. Right? If he had prayed before chapter 7, God would have said, you have sin in the camp, you need to deal with it, and then they would have gone into Ai. And then there would not have been a loss. It would have been a win. And then when they come here, these kings would still be decimated and have no hope. If only Joshua had taken time to pray. And as we look through this chapter, we're going to realize that this lack of prayer is a pattern that's going to continue into this chapter. And honestly, it's a pattern that's in my life a lot too. I just kind of think I know what's best and I move forward. And most of the time, that's not the best choice, unfortunately. If only I'd taken time to pray. And Joshua should have known better, right? Because his first victory was in Exodus 17, and the only reason he won is because Moses was praying, right? And Aaron and Hur were holding up his arms, and he was communing with God. And when the arms dropped, the battle would go backwards, and when his arms stayed up, they would win. And so Joshua should have known that his power comes from the Lord, right? He should have known that, and yet he's still having problems remembering to pray. So as we think about their sin, it does make a difference. Their power faded because of unconfessed sin and because of forgotten prayer. But the next thing, you look at verses 3 through 15, then we can see one of the real problems, the deception of the Gibeonites. The deception of the Gibeonites. That's not coming up the way I want it to. Well, try not to read ahead. That's verses 3 through 15. So look, here's what it says. When the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions, took worn-out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, and worn out patched sandals on their feet, and worn out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and crumbly. So they became masters of disguise. Right? I think about this. I just can't help but think about, I haven't seen the last couple, but all of the Mission Impossible movies, right? And it seems like in every one of them, they've got this scene where they put this mask on the guy, and all of a sudden the guy looks totally different, and he sounds totally different, and I just think there's no way that's possible. But it's a crazy, they put the mask on, and all of a sudden this guy that's like 6'2" is now 5'8", and he might have been 300 pounds, and now he's 200 pounds, and he looks just like this other dude, and they go in and they save the world. It's a disguise, right? And they became masters of disguise. And why would they do this? Well, in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 10 through 20, it allowed, those verses have very strict things in it, and it actually allowed for people that are from distant cities to come in and be protected by Israel. They wouldn't have to be destroyed. And whether they heard the message or not, the people probably not, but they probably had spies around, and they probably heard Joshua and the Israelites in chapter 8 rehearsing all of Deuteronomy. So they're trying to figure out a way to survive, and they hear Deuteronomy 20, 10 through 20, and they realize if maybe they just need to kind of hide these things. In Joshua 8, verse 30 through 35, it talks about some of this. Verse 33, and all Israel, sojourner as well as native-born, elders, sojourner will be stranger. They stood on opposite sides. There's a place for the stranger. There's always been a place for the stranger to come to Christ, to come to Jehovah. That was part of what Israel was supposed to do. So it's always been written in there. It's always there. Rahab, Ruth, sojourners, right? there's a little foreshadowing in chapter 8 of why they're doing this. And so it's old bread, it's old clothes, it's even old news. If you look at what they say, they don't mention Jericho and they don't mention Ai, because they know if they mention Jericho and Ai, then it's going to be obvious that they're there. But they're trying to make it look like they're not. So this master spy work, which is the other reason why I wore my old coat today, because it's 20 years old, right? And it says they went in and they got their old clothes. And I didn't dust off my shoes this morning, so I've got the dusty sandals. I haven't cut my hair, so I'm trying to make it look like I'm old and disheveled, right? Probably don't need to try so hard. I just kind of look that way. But hopefully you get the picture, right? They went into, in my house, if it was my house, they went into the pantry. They reached on the top shelf of the pantry where the cereal is, and they reached into the back where the old cereal that's kind of like melted together and is clumpy, and that's the cereal they grabbed to show their food. They grabbed the bread that's in the back that's just the crust, because nobody eats the crust, but nobody throws it away. And that's the bread they used, right? They went into their closet, and they went into the very back of the closet where all the old clothes are, and they reached in and they grabbed the 20-year-old clothes. If you are 20 years old, you don't have the old clothes section of the closet, unless you want to talk like onesies, but that'd just be weird. As you get older, the clothes tend to get older too. So my clothes, my oldest are like 20 years old. If you're in your 60s, maybe your oldest is like 40 years old. I don't know. But they went in and they got the old clothes, the ones that don't really fit, the ones that maybe have some moth-eaten holes in them, because they're trying to look like they don't belong, right? So hopefully you can kind of get the picture there. And they come to them, they look old, they look like they've been traveling. They said, man, we've been from this faraway place, worn out, patched clothes, sandals. In verse 6, it says, we've come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us. In the verse 7, the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us. Then how can we make a covenant with you? Like, they're so close. Verse 8, they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? They said to him, from a very distant country, your servants have come because of the name of the Lord your God. We have heard a report of him and all that he did in Egypt, all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, to Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. Our elders and inhabitants said to us, take provisions to go. Here we are, your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. Right? That's kind of the story. And here's where Joshua makes another mistake, and I call it, and I alluded to it earlier, and I alluded to it in the title. But here's where the problem of forgotten prayer really takes hold. If you look at Joshua chapter 9, verse 14 in the New English translation, I just like the way this reads. It says, the men examined some of their provisions. Then look at this. But they failed to ask the Lord's advice. And it's probably safe to say, at least for me, I know this is a problem for me, and I hope I'm not alone in this. But this one issue, coupled with my failure to confess sin many times, is the reason for most of my failures. And it's probably an obstacle that is overcome in most of my successes, right? We tend to pray about big, huge things, right? Well, maybe not. But if we're going to pray, we're probably praying about our family that has health struggles. We're probably praying for sickness, for those kinds of things. But at least for me, rarely do I pray about what I'm going to do that day, right? Or if something seems so obvious to me, I'll pray, but I'll pray, it's like I tack on a prayer. I'll be like, hey, God, bless this endeavor because I know it's what we need to do. And that's not what it should be. It should be, God, please lead me and direct me. And if this is your will, help me move forward. But if it's not, please make that clear and help me move somewhere else, right? And I've prayed that way before, and God has shown me what to do. And sometimes it's what I've wanted, sometimes it's not, and those things are tough. But I can tell you this with a fact: the times that I've forgotten to pray or neglected to pray are always times when there's future problems. And it's like, God, what can go wrong next? Well, God's just saying, stop and pray. Like, idiot, what are you doing? And that's what's happening here. Instead of stopping and praying, and it would have been clear, they didn't. Here's what David Howard Jr. says in the New American Commentary about this. I'm not sure if you can read that, but here's what he says. I'll go ahead and read it. This failure was contrary to the explicit instructions the Lord gave to Joshua concerning how to discern his will, that they should consult him by going to Eleazar the priest, who would consult the Lord using the Urim. This is in Numbers 27:21. The Israelites' confirmation of the Gibeons' claim was purely in their own strength and on their own initiative. The mistake on Israel's and Joshua's part was not that they were deceived per se, but that they did not ask for the Lord's counsel. This is certainly a warning to all who read this passage. God is there to be consulted, and we ignore him at our peril. Unless you wonder what the verse says, this is Numbers 27:21. He shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the people of Israel with him, the whole congregation. Jumping back to the quote, God is there to be consulted, and we ignore him at our peril. We often think of the Gibeonites as this horrible group of people who deceived Israel and were saved because they deceived Israel. And I'll just throw the question now. If you're in Gibeon's spot, what do you do? I mean, I'm going to try and figure out a way that I don't die, because I don't want to die. So I think before we place a ton of blame at the feet of the Gibeonites, we need to understand that all Joshua had to do was pray and ask God and get direction from God, and God would have told him that the Gibeonites are not travelers, that they live right there. But he failed to pray. Some other verses that talk about this. David, to his son Solomon, said this in 1 Chronicles 28, if you seek him, he will be found by you, but if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. 2 Chronicles 15:2, Solomon said to Asa, hear Asa and all Judah and Benjamin, the Lord is with you while you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you, but if you forsake him, he will forsake you. What do we need to understand here? It is never too late or too unimportant to stop and pray over the issue or the problem that you are currently facing. It's never too late to pray. Pray now. So here's the question for this section. What is the decision you know you need to pray about, but have not yet taken the time to do so? Maybe you need to stop. Maybe you need to say a prayer right now and ask God for guidance. So, there was a problem. There was a difference that sin made, and it caused all these problems. There was deception by the Gibeonites, in which we saw the main issue with Israel was a problem of forgotten prayer. And then the third thing that I want to focus the rest of our time on is Joshua 9, verses 16 through 27, and I call this section the deliverance of the Gibeonites. And so Joshua makes this covenant in verse 15. And then in verse 16 it says, at the end of 3 days. So I kind of picture this like, you're watching a movie or a TV show or something, and a bunch of things happen, and then there's like ... 3 days later. That's what I think here. At the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. So the deception doesn't hold up, doesn't last. 3 days later, they're like, oh, man. And they're mad. Like, if you read through it, and time's drawing to a close, like, they want to destroy the Gibeonites. Like, man, we just made this covenant, but they lied to us, and we made this covenant, we sealed it, but we want to destroy them. And here's what I want us to see here. 2 wrongs never make a right. Just because they made this error doesn't mean they should continue to make future errors. They wanted to destroy Gibeon, but the leaders and Joshua refused because they had made a commitment, and so they would follow through on their commitments. And so as you read through it, it says that Joshua gets upset. But he says, and the leader said to them, let them live. So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. Joshua summoned them, and he said to them, why did you deceive us, saying we are very far from you, and you dwell among us? Now therefore you're cursed. Some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood, and drawers of water for the house of my God. They were cursed to be servants. But not just any servants. And I think this is important to understand. Eventually, these people, these Gibeonites, would become temple servants. Their job would be to cut the wood and haul the water for the temple work, for worship, and all those kinds of things. In the Bible Knowledge Commentary, Joshua Campbell says it this way. He says, such is the grace of God. He is able to turn a curse into a blessing. Though it is usually true that the natural consequences of sin must run their course, the grace of God can not only forgive, but also overrule mistakes and often bring blessings out of sins and failures. And I love that. And I love that about this story as I look at the Gibeonites, because a servant to Jehovah is always a better position than a king against Jehovah. They went from being against Jehovah, and now they're going to become his servants. Are they his servants right now? Probably not. But this leads me to my next point, and that's this, the salvation of the Gibeonites. This is where they finally become a forgiven people. And so I'm going to lay out a case for this, because some of you may be thinking, well, the Gibeonites, they're this evil people. There's no way. Remember, God can use mistakes for his glory. Even if your sin puts you in a place where there's all sorts of consequences, when you confess, then there's always opportunities for you to declare the glory and power of Christ. Even if you move in the wrong direction and you end up in the wrong place because you forgot to pray, God can still use mistakes for his glory, and he often does. So I want to compare the Gibeonite statement to Rahab's in Joshua chapter 2 in just a moment. And Francis Schaeffer goes so far to say that Rahab's statement and the Gibeonite statement are identical statements of faith, in the sense that they've placed their faith in Messiah. And I don't agree with that, but I think that happens later, all right? There are other commentators who in this section will say that the Gibeonites are committing blasphemy in what they say to Joshua. And I don't see that either. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think as they were saved by Israel, God used that to open a door so that the Gibeonites could eventually come to faith. That's kind of where I land on it. But for the sake of argument, let's look at the two statements. First, follow along with me in Joshua chapter 9. I'm going to read verses 8 through 10, part of 11, and verses 24 through 26, so that we can get the whole confession of the Gibeonites. Right? Here's what they said. Verse 8. They said to Joshua, "We are your servants." Joshua said to them, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" They said to him, "From a very distant country." So yes, they're lying, right? "Your servants have come because of the name of the Lord your God. Because of your God, we have heard a report of him, all that he did in Egypt, all that he did to the two kings, to the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So we said, we are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. And jumping to verse 24, they answered Joshua, because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God, Jehovah, had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. We feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing. Behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it. So he did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel. They did not kill them. So that's the Gibeonites' confession. Here's Rahab's confession, and you can just turn back a couple pages to Joshua chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, because it is small on the screen there. But here's what Rahab said. I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and that you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted. There was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heavens above and on the earth beneath. It's a very similar statement, right? The obvious difference is Rahab has the confession, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. So that's why I would say the Gibeonites, they're not quite there yet. But let's take a moment and look at the transformation of the Gibeonites. Because you see, Gibeon would become one of the cities of refuge as Israel came in and took over the land, and all of the land was divided, and the cities of refuge were listed, and all those things. Gibeon was a city of refuge, which is interesting because that meant that it would be a place that you would run to if you killed someone and had to, in manslaughter or something like that, and had to go and be somewhere where you could be safe. Right? That was kind of the point of the cities of refuge. One of the Gibeonites would even become one of David's mighty men, which I think is pretty cool. 1 Chronicles 12:4a, Ishmaiah of Gibeon, so a Gibeonite, a mighty man among the 30 and a leader over the 30. So he wasn't just a mighty man, he was a leader with David in 1 Chronicles. They would be a people that would be protected by God himself. You see, in Samuel, 1 2 Samuel, Saul tried to kill a bunch of the Gibeonites. He wanted to get rid of them. And as a result, there was a 3-year famine. And look at what 2 Samuel 21 says. There was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David sought the face of the Lord. And the Lord said, there's blood guilt on Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death. So God will protect the Gibeonites, and he would cause problems if people went against them. And then, lastly, the tabernacle would rest in Gibeon. 2 Chronicles 1:3 says this, and Solomon and all the assembly with him went to the high place that was at Gibeon, for the tent of meeting of God, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, had made in the wilderness, was there. So Gibeon ended up a home for the very tabernacle and dwelling place of God. The same people that in chapter 9 here are being deceptive and then had this statement. So something happened from there to this place. And one of the things that I think is interesting is you never once read anywhere in the Old Testament, to my knowledge, where the Gibeonites rise up to fight against Israel. The whole time they're with Israel. They're always with Israel. In fact, they would be part of those who would rebuild the wall of Jerusalem after the exile, which would mean that part of the Gibeonites were sent away into exile with the rest of Judah when they went to Babylon. Because here's what Nehemiah 3 says of the people that came back. And next to them repaired Melatiah the Gibeonite, and Jadon the Meronothite, the men of Gibeon and of Mizpah, and the seat of the governor and province beyond the river. So they were part of repairing the walls, right? They had gone from this thing of deception to God giving them this place of serving, and eventually, I think somewhere along the line, they had this moment where they realized that they weren't just serving in a temple of a God, they were serving in a temple of the one true God. And they made that decision, which I think is really great. Because right here with these Gibeonites, I can see a bit of a picture of myself. Hopefully you can see a picture of yourself. You see, Israel wasn't supposed to just stand alone and just be them. They were always supposed to be a missionary nation, going out and grabbing sojourners, bringing them to the Messiah, bringing them to Jehovah, and yet they failed to do it. And here, by accident, they actually did. So you have, and I love that about Joshua, because you have Rahab, right? A Gentile, right? From Jericho. You've got the Gibeonites, right? We jump ahead into the time of the Judges, and you come to the book of Ruth, and you have Ruth, who is a Moabite. All of these people that don't belong, and yet God, in His grace and in His love and in His forgiveness, He opens the door and makes a way for them, just like He's opened the door to make a way for us. And in fact, in Joshua chapter 7 and 8, it's actually called the valley. It's actually called the door of hope, right? In the prophecies, the valley of pain, the valley of Achor, has become a door of hope, a door that you can come to walk through, to have salvation. Right? And that's what I love about this story. Right? They started in a place where it is clear that they're sinners, and they ended in a place where it seems clear that they came to Christ, or came to Jehovah, came to Messiah. So what are some final lessons that we can learn, and then we're done? So first, the first point, there's a lesson about sin. All right, remember, my sin today may have unforeseen consequences tomorrow. That's what happened to the Israelites. So, seek forgiveness today. I don't know your issues. I don't know where you're at. But if there's a sin that you're struggling with, today is the day to come forward and confess to God and ask Him to forgive you, and then take steps to get the help that you need to follow Him. Your sin could have unforeseen consequences. Seek forgiveness today. A lesson about prayer is the next bullet point there. Even the smallest or most obvious decisions should only be made after spending time with God in prayer. I don't know what the decision is that you need to make, but I do know that you need to pray about it. And I know that we all have things we need to pray about. So take time today and every day to ask for God's guidance. And then lastly, a lesson about salvation. God makes a way for the sojourner or the stranger to follow Him. God's grace can bring salvation to even the vilest and most condemned. The Gibeonites were a people that were destined to be destroyed, to be wiped off the face of the earth. But God, right? I don't know where you're at. I don't know. Most of us are probably believers, but if not, if you've never had that time where you've placed your faith and trust in Christ alone to save you because He died on the cross and rose from the grave for your sins, today is your opportunity. You don't have to continue in the deception and the struggle. You can make the same decision the Gibeonites would eventually make, and you can come to that door of hope, and you can walk through it and say, God, here I am. I'm a sinner. I need you. Save me. It's not so much what you pray or any of that stuff. It's a heart decision that you make in your mind, and you say, God, I know that I'm a sinner. I know that my sin has separated me from you. I know that Jesus came to earth. He is God. He died on the cross. He rose from the grave for my sin, and I'm asking him to save me. It's really that simple. Right? So there's a lesson about prayer. There's a lesson about sin, and there's a lesson about salvation. I don't know where you fit, but I can almost guarantee that one of these 3 points is right where you are. So as we wrap this up and I close in prayer, that's the invitation this morning. If you're struggling with sin, before you leave, take time to confess it to God and get some help. Talk to someone here. If there's a decision you need to make before you leave this morning, take time and ask God to give you the wisdom and the guidance. And if there's never been a time where you've placed your faith and trust in Christ alone to save you, before you walk out those doors, come talk to me, come talk to Dan, come talk to many of us, and we can share with you how you can have that relationship with him, because you don't want to wait. Make that decision today. A forgotten prayer and a forgiven people. I love that the Gibeonites would get to the point where they would be forgiven and they would have a place to serve Jehovah. You can have that place too. You just have to make a decision to follow him. That being said, let's close in prayer. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the things that we can learn in the Old Testament, how they're still relevant. They're there for our example today. God, thank you that you save, that you forgive. Thank you that you work in the midst of our problems. Thank you that you can always be glorified, that you are always working. And God, I pray that if there's people here that need you, that they would make that decision for you. And I pray that you would lead people to follow you in prayer, that you would lead people to confess, that we would be a people that are on our knees before you, that we would be a people to share with others about who you are and what you've done for them, and that we would see a revival in this community for you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks, Andy. One of the things that Andy said was talking about Israel was intended to be a missionary nation. And then Jesus said in Matthew 16, I will build my church. And I believe that God's program now is